While Donald Trump was telling the world that Iran was already on its knees, that the war was practically won, that it was only a matter of days before Tehran signed its surrender, something happened that no Western television channel dared to broadcast in its entirety. Something that Pentagon generals are still processing with trembling hands. Something that radically changes everything you thought you knew about this war. And I have it. I am going to tell you. Welcome to Professor Jian Wei Explains. My friends, today is April 3rd, 2026, and what you are about to hear is not just another analysis, not just another opinion, not a repetition of what the major media already told you. What you are going to hear today is the other side of a war that, according to the official narrative, is already over. According to Donald Trump, according to the headlines of the major Western media, according to Pentagon spokespeople, Iran was devastated, decimated, reduced to ashes. But there is footage nobody wants to show you. There are numbers nobody wants to give you. There are American soldiers crouching on the ground, covering their heads with their arms, praying that the next missile does not fall on top of them. I am going to tell you about it, because you deserve the truth. Not the version that suits Washington, not the version that serves Tel Aviv. The truth that is happening right now in the Persian Gulf, in the Strait of Hormuz, in the military bases that were supposedly protected and that turned out not to be protected at all. Pay close attention to what I am about to say, because it is the starting point for everything that follows. Just days ago, Donald Trump came out, with that self-assurance that characterizes him, with that arrogance we all know well, to say that the Iranian army was practically extinct, that the nuclear installations had been destroyed, that the missiles no longer existed, that the drones no longer existed, that the Revolutionary Guard was in total panic. And I ask you, my friends, if that were true, if Iran really were as destroyed as Trump says, how do you explain what happened just hours ago? How do you explain the largest, most coordinated, and most devastating attack the Revolutionary Guard has executed since this conflict began? Because the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps of Iran, the IRGC, launched in the last few hours more than 100 heavy missiles, more than 100, combined with explosive attack drones, counted by the dozens, combined with nearly 200 rockets guided with surgical precision against U.S. military positions and their allies distributed across the entire region. 100 missiles, 200 rockets, swarms of drones. This is not what a destroyed army does. This is not what a military force in its death throes does. This is what a power that has spent decades preparing for exactly this moment does. But let me slow down, because there are details you need to hear carefully. The Revolutionary Guard did not attack blindly. They did not launch missiles into the air, hoping they would fall somewhere. They attacked with intelligence. They attacked with information. They struck specific points, concrete locations, meetings of officers that were supposedly secret. And here is where what should truly concern you begins, my friends. The IRGC identified and struck with precision a hidden meeting point, a place that did not appear on any public map, a place being used as an operations coordination center near the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet base in Bahrain. They struck it with a swarm of explosive drones combined with precision ballistic missiles, and the result was devastating. A large number of senior U.S. naval officers were seriously wounded. Several of them were emergency evacuated on medical flights destined for hospitals in Panama, not nearby military bases. Civilian hospitals in the Panamanian capital. Why Panama? Because it is far enough from the conflict zone that nobody asks uncomfortable questions. Because nobody there will see the bloodied uniforms. Because journalists have no access. That is what they are not telling you. That is what Trump will not say at his next press conference. And it did not end there. No, my friends, it did not end there. That was only the first wave. Because simultaneously, while the missiles were falling on Bahrain, IRGC forces executed another coordinated attack against a secret site on Bahraini territory, where approximately 80 American troops were hidden. 80 soldiers who believed they were safe, who believed Iranian intelligence had not located them, who believed that distance and secrecy were protecting them. They were not invisible. They had been found, located, and struck. And after Bahrain came the strike on the United Arab Emirates. This is what has the Washington military establishment in a state of silent shock. The UAE, that supposedly impregnable ally, that strategic partner that signed the Abraham Accords with such pomp and ceremony, also received its share. IRGC naval forces eliminated a secret meeting site for American officers near the Al Minhad Air Base in Dubai, a high-level meeting, a meeting where approximately 200 soldiers were present, including senior-ranking commanders. And according to the official IRGC report, at least 37 people were eliminated in that attack, 37, and as many others had to be transferred to hospitals by ambulance, 37. And not a single CNN anchor mentioned that. Not a single MSNBC host mentioned it. Nobody in the major Western media mentioned it, because that number, that concrete and real number, destroys the narrative they are building, the narrative of the easy victory, the narrative of the war concluded, the narrative of the defeated enemy. Now there is something I need to explain, something fundamental for understanding everything that is happening. When Trump talks about Iran, when he says they have no armament left, that they have exhausted their missiles, that they have nothing left to respond with, he is repeating exactly the same thing that Israeli generals said weeks ago. Exactly the same. And General Ibrahim Jolfagari, official spokesman of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, responded in a way worth listening to very carefully, because there is not much room for interpretation. He said, and this is almost literal, "Your information about our military power is incomplete. You are completely unaware of our real strategic capabilities. The centers you believe you have destroyed are insignificant to us. Our strategic military production takes place in locations you do not know and will never reach. Do not bother counting our missiles, our drones, our strategic equipment, because you will certainly be wrong, and the price of that error you are going to pay." My friends, that is not the communique of a decimated army. That is not the message of a force in its death throes. That is the declaration of someone who knows exactly what they have, who knows exactly what they can do, and who is already demonstrating it. But let me now talk about something that goes much deeper than missiles and drones. There is a political dimension of power that has to do with who controls the narrative and who is losing control of it. Mojtaba Khamenei is not Ali Khamenei. The man who today spiritually leads the Islamic Republic is not the same one who fell on February 28, 2026, in that joint operation. He is his son, a leader who came to power at the worst possible moment, in the heat of war, amid bombardments, amid an unprecedented crisis. And yet the Iranian war machine did not stop. It did not waver. On the contrary, the Revolutionary Guard, that military apparatus built over decades as guardian of the system, took the reins with a speed that surprised even its own analysts. That is what Trump does not understand. That is what Netanyahu did not calculate. That killing the supreme leader does not kill the system. That the Revolutionary Guard does not need a theologian to launch a ballistic missile. It has its own generals, its own engineers, its own doctrine, and that doctrine says the war continues until the definitive surrender of the enemy. My friends, I need you to pay attention now to the real numbers of this war, because numbers do not lie even when politicians do. It has been said, and this comes from military sources that are not exactly pro-Iranian, that the U.S. military spent in the first week of this conflict an amount of anti-aircraft missiles, rockets, and precision munitions that would have taken 3 years of industrial production to accumulate. 3 years in 1 week. Can you imagine what that means logistically? Can you imagine what that means in terms of budget? If the war were already won, as Trump says, then why is the administration asking Congress for an additional $200 billion to fund the conflict? $200 billion. That is not the budget of a concluded war. That is the budget of a war that is barely entering its most costly phase. And meanwhile, Iran keeps exporting oil. It keeps collecting transit fees in the Strait of Hormuz. It keeps deciding who passes and who does not. That strait that was once free, that was once a neutral international corridor, now has a gatekeeper, and that gatekeeper is called the Islamic Republic of Iran. And it is not just charging money. It is charging recognition. It is charging respect. It is charging a geopolitical fee that no bombardment has managed to eliminate. Look at Ben Gurion Airport. The main air entry and exit point of Israel was attacked. The footage circulating, footage you will not find on the 7 o'clock news, shows the level of damage, destroyed pipes, shattered water systems. Tel Aviv is experiencing massive cuts to basic services in several sectors. And nobody tells you that either. Because if they told you, the narrative of the Israeli victory becomes impossible to sustain. And if that narrative falls, the entire political justification for Netanyahu's war comes crashing down like a house of cards. Netanyahu calculated that Iran would surrender quickly. He calculated that without Khamenei, the system would collapse. He calculated that the combination of Israeli bombardments and American air power would be sufficient to break the will of a people that has spent decades preparing for exactly this moment. And that calculation was profoundly wrong. Now, there is something I consider absolutely necessary to discuss. What is really happening inside the West Wing of the White House? Trump has around him competent, cold, calculating operators. Marco Rubio at the State Department, Mike Waltz coordinating from national security, Elon Musk operating from a dimension that nobody fully understands. These men read the same reports that arrived to the generals. They have access to the same intelligence. And at some point between the triumphalist speeches for the electoral base, someone in that room must be telling him the truth, that this is not finished, that the human cost is greater than anticipated, that the Revolutionary Guard is not as destroyed as was proclaimed, that the reputation of the United States in the Arab world, in the Islamic world, in the global South is paying a price that was not in any spreadsheet. Someone must be telling Trump that. The question is whether he is listening, because look at what is happening in parallel. Trump says Iran is asking him for a ceasefire. He has said it publicly. He has repeated it on his social networks, and Tehran has denied it every time, categorically, without ambiguity, over and over. The Iranian government spokesman said in plain words that there is no negotiation, no ceasefire request, that whoever is looking for an exit is the other side. Who is lying? I ask you, my friends, who is lying? A president who has spent weeks saying the war is already won while asking Congress for an additional $200 billion to fund it. A president who says Iran is decimated while his own soldiers are cowering on the ground, terrified by the bombardments raining down on them. That is not a war that has been won. That is a war in full escalation. And the difference between those two things has consequences that go far beyond what any of us can calculate from here. Let us talk about the Strait of Hormuz, because it is the economic heart of all of this. Through that strait passes approximately 20% of the oil consumed by the entire world. Millions of barrels per day, energy supplies for Europe, for Asia, for economies that depend on that crude oil flow. And that strait, my friends, is no longer neutral. Iran decided who passes and who does not. It is collecting a geopolitical toll from every vessel that wants to transit. The oil that was once sold at market price is now sold at war price. Every day under its control is an Iranian economic victory, and Trump has a solution for that. He says Europe should take care of reopening it, that it is not the United States' responsibility because they have their own oil. Can you believe that, my friends? The consequences of a Strait of Hormuz under Iranian control are felt in Berlin, in Tokyo, in Seoul, in fuel prices, in global inflation, and Trump reduces it to Europe figuring it out on its own. That is the strategic vision of whoever is conducting the most dangerous war of the 21st century. And while all of this is happening, while missiles fall and soldiers hide and ships pay tolls in the strait, there is a date nobody is mentioning, but that hangs in the air like a sword over the heads of everyone making decisions in this war. Religious holidays. Iran carried out the largest wave of attacks of the entire conflict precisely during the Passover period, the Jewish Passover. That was not accidental. Nothing the IRGC does is accidental. It is a symbolic message so loaded with historical significance that no serious analyst can ignore it. The Iranians remember that when this conflict began, they were in the middle of Ramadan, the sacred month of Islam, and they were attacked anyway because war does not respect the religious calendars of the adversary. Now they return the gesture. Now they attack at the moment of greatest emotional and spiritual weight for the Jewish people, not as profanation, but as a political message, as a signal that this war has no expiration date dictated by Washington, as a signal that they set the rhythm too. My friends, I know there is a question many of you are asking. The question of whether Iran can really win this war. And I tell you, that is not the right question. The right question is, how long can Iran avoid losing? Because in a war of attrition, which is the strategy Iran executes with impressive discipline, time is the most valuable resource. Every day without surrendering is a day of Iranian victory. Every missile that falls on a U.S. base without Washington publicly acknowledging it is a crack in the narrative of triumph. And Tehran knows that with precision. It has spent decades building this doctrine, the doctrine of the enemy that bleeds slowly without realizing it. And facing that doctrine, the political impatience of Trump that need to announce quick victories for his electoral base becomes a first-order strategic weakness. Now listen carefully to this because it is important. The Revolutionary Guard, under the operational leadership of its most senior generals, is not improvising. It is not reacting chaotically to the chaos of war. It is executing a plan that was designed over years, a plan that took into account exactly this scenario, the scenario in which the supreme political leadership falls, in which nuclear installations are attacked, in which the main military-industrial centers are bombed. For all of that, there are protocols. For all of that, there are alternative installations. For all of that, there are redundant chains of command that continue functioning even when the main link has been destroyed. The IRGC spokesman was not bluffing when he said that their production centers for strategic missiles, long-range offensive drones, air defense systems, and electronic warfare are intact. He said it because it is true, because the system was designed to be true even in the worst possible scenario. And here, my friends, I want you to hold on to this thought. The Persian Empire has 3,000 years of history, 3,000 years of civilization, of wars, of conquests, of defeats, of resurgences. Iran has been invaded by the Greeks of Alexander the Great, by the Mongols of Genghis Khan, by the Soviets in the 20th century, and on every occasion it survived, not intact, not without scars, but it survived. And that historical memory, that collective consciousness of having been here before and having come through, is a strategic asset that does not appear in any Pentagon intelligence analysis. Pentagon analysts know how to count missiles. They know how to calculate the percentage of destroyed installations, but they do not know how to measure the will of a people that decides to fight. And that, my friends, is what this war is demonstrating day after day. Professor Jian Wei Explains will continue informing you of every development in this conflict, not with the narrative that suits the powerful, not with the headlines that allow those who made the wrong decisions to sleep peacefully, but with the information you need to truly understand what is happening in this corner of the world that is going to define the geopolitics of the coming decades. My friends, I want to close today with a question that will stay with you in the coming days. While Trump keeps announcing victories that the numbers do not confirm, and while the Revolutionary Guard keeps launching waves of missiles that supposedly no longer exist, there is a variable that nobody is discussing publicly. There is an actor on this board that has spent weeks in almost total silence. An actor that has its own missiles, its own drones, its own networks in the region. An actor that learned a very specific lesson from everything that is happening in this war. And that lesson could change the entire board before any of us anticipates it. Stay alert, stay subscribed, because what is coming may be bigger than everything we have already seen. I am your analyst at Professor Jian Wei Explains. See you very soon.